Hello bitches, welcome back to my channel. So for today's speed paint, I am making a comic about, imposter syndrome and how that was definitely a prevalent part of the beginnings of my career, from my internships to my first time jobs. It was just always me being anxious about where I stand in my employment, and I feared that anything small I did could have gotten me fired. So if you relate to this and want to read the full comic, it is on my Instagram. I guess this kind of bleeds into today's video topic, which is the worst projects or studios I've ever worked for in animation. And hopefully some of you don't have to relate to this, or maybe some of you do relate to this. Or if you haven't, joined or started working in animation yet, then maybe here are some things that you should actively avoid. With one of them being that some studios just don't provide ergonomic options when you're going to be working and drawing at a desk for 8 or more hours a day, which is why I would like to bring in today's video sponsor, FlexiSpot. So thank you FlexiSpot for sponsoring today's video. For those of you unfamiliar with FlexiSpot is an ergonomic furniture store online that covers a vast area of different types of ergonomic furniture, from standing desks to office chairs and whatnot. So I currently have the FlexiSpot ergonomic office chair that they sent me a long time ago, and I still have it to this day because it literally is my favorite office chair. I can adjust almost any aspect of it, from the height to the armrest to the lumbar support and even the headrest. And I also have the FlexiSpot electric adjustable standing desk EN1, which is a great beginner starter standing desk. But this stand desk you can just have at a basic height, or you can adjust it to a height of your liking if you want to stand with it. You can customize the top of the desk and the legs of the desk to your liking, with my personal favorite being white and black. So if any of you are interested in getting some ergonomic furniture for your home office, FlexiSpot is offering up to $200 off for FlexiSpot Brand Day. This is only going to happen once a year, so check out the description box below for more information. Otherwise, you might have to wait until Black Friday for a deal like this again. Anyway, thank you FlexiSpot again for sponsoring this video, and I'm so happy to just know that they're offering my viewers more ergonomic options to work with. Okay, so getting back onto the real tea of today's video, I wanted to discuss some of the worst projects or studios I've worked for, but unfortunately I will not be throwing any names under the bus, just because honestly I am still working in animation, and if desperate times come, I will still need a job. And yeah, unfortunately that's just a sad, bittersweet truth of life, but of course I'm going to be doing my best to avoid situations like this again, and that is why I am sharing the information in today's video, so that you can also be aware that you don't have to take some of this BS if you ever come across it during your, career or journey in the arts. So immediately off the top of my head, I have one studio that will be the top of my least favorites that I've ever worked for, with one of the reasons being their office location. I believe they have moved by this point, but this studio that I once freelanced or worked for over a summer was located in not the best parts of Los Angeles, and I don't blame studios sometimes for having to resort to not the best locations, because real estate is already expensive as it is here, and that's probably why they moved, so good for them. But during my times of working there, I was still just working alone here with no family or friends. I was just by myself, living on my own, and commuting to this office every day was a bit stressful for me, because I had to pass by a lot of not the best parts of LA and just question my safety. And while again this is not exactly the fault of the studio itself, I just wished maybe they could acknowledge the problem or just do a little bit of something for it, because I did work for another studio that had a similar issue of not being in the best location, but they at least acknowledged the problem and took action on it. So basically this other studio I worked for knew that their location was not the best and not everyone was able to fit into the parking of their studio because for some reason they only had limited parking at the base of the studio. So other employees had to search for parking elsewhere. It could be blocks away somewhere else. Some people might be walking, taking public transportation. I don't know. And that might not always be safe for people when they are having to walk a longer distance away to the studio itself. So the studio basically ended up providing these gift cards or these debit cards that basically are just like cash in the form of a card, and you could just do whatever and spend money on that, on whether if it's public transportation, your commute, or just if you don't even really need it, you could spend it on yourself. They knew that, hey, we're going to have to compensate for people who are not able to park directly on our studio lot. So I appreciated that they at least did that and gave us money for having to deal with whatever we had to do to get to the office. I personally was also able to negotiate for a little bit more money, being a single young woman just having to go to the office by herself, and they even said themselves that they are prioritizing the more vulnerable groups and they are willing to pay a little bit more money for those who might need it. So they were really flexible in that aspect, and I appreciated it. So going back to the studio that was not located in the best area, they again did not provide any form of compensation or acknowledgement about, being in somewhat of a questionable area. And some of the things that you would have to deal with just going to the office was just random guys just following you, saying very inappropriate things, or just people showing parts of their body that you just don't want to see and just leaving you with very icky thoughts for the rest of the day. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Another thing that I did not like about working at the studio was I noticed they constantly moved me. So when I first started working at the studio, they first gave me this kind of open office space that I just had pretty much to myself. But for some reason, they kept moving me. Like each week they would start moving me to a different office space within their studio, but each space started to pretty much degrade. Like first I would have a space all to myself, then all of a sudden I was sharing one small room with somebody else, then the next week I would be in this really cramped space with everybody with no separation whatsoever, and it was like you were in a very cramped cafe, but just now with multiple people working on their computers with no ergonomic options. So it's one of those things where I know you can't always determine the type of space that you're working in at a studio, but I just never received like a heads up, and it would just always happen to me like the day of. No one would ever email me and just be like, hey, so this is happening because of this reason. It was just, I would go to work and that day they'd be like, hey, we're moving you, okay, and I just have to deal with it. By the time I was working in the cramped area, I was pretty much breathing like the same air as my different 5 neighbors that were sitting like right next to me. So this place definitely would not have passed the COVID test if it was still here in this day and age of COVID. But I pretty much just, accepted it and didn't say anything about it because I was still new to the industry and I was always fearful of, oh, if I speak up and say something, they're just gonna fire me or whatever. So I always feared speaking up due to these things. But now as I am much older, I realize that I should speak up for myself in situations like this. The next thing that annoyed me about working at the studio was anytime I wanted to gain information about my employment, I felt like I was getting in trouble for asking for some reason, because this was a contractual freelance opportunity. It wasn't necessarily an internship or a full-time job. So every time I asked about, hey, so am I going to be extended? Am I going to end my contract like this week? The answer would always change and I would never receive like an answer correctly. And when I did ask about my employment, it was like I was getting in trouble for it, because whenever they responded to me, they would basically say things that had the subtext of, hey, you shouldn't be asking me this question. You're bothering me for asking me this question. I don't know. Nobody knows. Why are you asking me this? And I'm like, well, shouldn't you know because I'm working for your company? Like, I don't know. I feel like my employment contract is at least the least thing I should know for working here, because I pretty much much sacrificed like my life and where I live to be here, so yeah. So TLDR, I pretty much went into this freaking studio all day, every day, not knowing if this day was going to be my last day or not, and maybe I would be extended, I don't know. I just had to go into the office every day and pray for the best. So the next thing that really bugged me about working at this studio was when I needed to take time off for vacation, in which I let them know before I even started working there. When I went on vacation with my family, people proceeded to continue to contact me while I was in a different state somewhere else, spending time not getting paid by this studio. They were still reaching out to me to pretty much work and deliver stuff for them, even though it was not directly drawing. I had to basically remain in communication with people and direct them to where my files were and basically let them know what this and that was. And of course, just knowing who I was back then, I was like, you know what, I should just answer because who knows if I'll get fired for like not responding or something. I spent that time while I was on vacation with my family having to communicate with these people at work who could not respect my vacation time. So yeah, I pretty much did a little bit of free work for them, but that is something I would never do in this current day and age now that I know how things work a little bit better. But if you do ever decide to take off from work for vacation, please make sure that you handle all of like what communication is going to look like during the time that you are away, because some studios might think that, oh, even if you're on vacation, you could at least respond to a text or something, but you want to make sure that you clarify that so nobody is overstepping certain boundaries. But in my honest opinion, I don't think that you should be having to respond to work stuff while you are on vacation with those days that you have either accrued or are taking unpaid. So now moving on to a different studio, because honestly this huge chunk was just definitely dedicated to the first studio. I'm going to be talking about another studio that I briefly worked for, and I wouldn't say that this is the worst studio I worked for, it's just some of the team members on this project were kind of questionable, because when I was working for this studio, someone from our team wanted to go on vacation and they asked if I could help cover some of their work basically while they were away. And I was like, sure. But when I went into their office space, because I had to sit in their office for some reason, they left out a lot of notebooks or sketchbooks or loose pieces of paper that weren't even hidden of just these drawings of women in these very like inappropriate poses. And I know that in art and animation you take a lot of life drawing classes, which will definitely involve nude figure drawing, but these drawings, let me tell you, were not just nude. There were definitely a lot of suggestive themes in them, so I felt a little bit uncomfortable after that moment, and anytime I interacted with this team member, especially after he came back, I was just very awkward and I did not really want to interact with him that much, just knowing that, oh, he had this perspective of women and did this. And again, I think this is fine if you just left it in private, but it's just like you just left it out there and available knowing someone's gonna come sit at your desk, like what? Well, thankfully that job was temporary and I left after a few months, and moving on to another studio that I worked for during COVID, so I didn't have to go into an office for this one, but the project itself I personally did not enjoy. So I worked on this project that was pretty much an adult sitcom show that really did not align with any of my interests whatsoever, but they just needed someone to fill the role quickly and I needed to get paid, so I took that job. I noticed that this might be a pipeline that many adult sitcom shows might follow, so this is just, again, based off of my personal experience and other friends that I've worked with that have also worked on projects like this but did not feel totally aligned with it. But for the show that I worked on, they basically used the puppeteering method where basically you copy and paste this model that already exists and then you just erase and transform or move parts of the character to fit the current scene in the script. So it's not like you're really drawing, you're just editing this pre-existing 2D 2D puppet of a character, which personally is not my favorite because at that point it's overly technical. Maybe this is more of a preferential thing, so for some artists out there, maybe they'll like this, but it was also extremely script driven, so you pretty much had to abide by the script, the puppet, the model. It was like just following rules on this job, and that was just not my preference when working in the industry. I felt like when we had meetings, there wasn't really much you can say because even though studios are always like, we value your voice, share your voice, it's like, okay, let's be real. Once you get to certain projects, they'll say that, but they don't actually follow through with it, and they'll just not really take in any additional thoughts or opinions from other of their story artists and just stick with the script. And then when you do come up with ideas to pitch or bring up, sometimes, this happened to me at a different studio actually, the showrunner would kind of act as if like, oh, were you clueless about this thing? Like, did you not know about this thing? And I like very subtly gaslight you or something when you're pitching an idea that doesn't align exactly with the show, but it's like you're bringing in a new idea anyway. I feel like that sort of condescending behavior towards someone who just wants to present a new idea is just very discouraging and will prevent people from wanting to share their ideas in the future. But yeah, those are just some of my personal experiences that stood out to me when thinking back on some of my worst experiences or worst studios or projects I've ever worked for. So hopefully you know that some of these things are not things that you have to take, and I only know that because I've worked for studios that did the complete opposite of studios like these. So I know that a life outside of these things that I dislike dealing with exists, so you should try your best to go for the things that you know you obviously deserve for the better, and not have to just settle for these types of studios just because you fear like you might not get this job or you might get fired in the future. Your health, your safety matters first. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. So peace out and stay wholesome, bitches.